Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Wednesday, July 13th, 2022, and I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the now wearing glasses, Cody Roadcap. What's up?
How's it going? Yeah, George ditched his glasses last week, so the show felt a little empty. So I had to get out my light blue, anti-light blue, whatever those for if you stare at a computer screen too long, glasses on. Put them on. Just get a little glasses action on the show today.
Let me just say they are perfectly your style. I think you should wear them all the time, even when you don't need them. Just saying, but
I appreciate it. I
we'll
appreciate
see.
it.
Yeah. We'll see if Cody keeps them on for the entire episode. If you do want to see him, make sure you go over and catch us on YouTube. If you're listening to us on audio, he is shaking his head no. But yes, definitely go over and check us out on YouTube. But today on the show, we're going to be covering some NFL news and notes, and we are going to be going back to our early rankings with the tight end rankings. We're going to hit 1 through 15 on today's show. If you want to follow along or get a little sneak peek, you can head over to the couchgms.com where our rankings are in the rankings tab. And check us out on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the Couch GMs. And I guess I should add TikTok onto that too. I have to get used to this with my intro. We're also on TikTok at the Couch GMs. Cody, let's just jump right into NFL news. Starting off some NFL news with some groundbreaking NFL history here. I almost said Oakland Raiders. I'm with Cody here now, and he's the one that says Oakland. The Las Vegas Raiders hired Sarah Douglas Morgan as the team's first black female president, and it's the first black female president in NFL history. So we know there was a lot going on with the Raiders organization recently, and I think it's a solid move for their PR to go out there and do something no other team has done before. What do you think, Cody?
Yeah, I like it, and I don't want this to come across that we think this is a PR move. She's definitely qualified for the position.
Yes. Yeah.
And it leads off the NFL news because it's important to highlight when new things that unfortunately not all fans out there get excited about or they're looking for, but it's always great to see the spectrum of NFL fandom growing, and it's also great to see that carry over into front offices, coaches, referees, whatever it may be. But shout out to the Raiders for setting us in another step in the right direction, and hopefully looking forward to many more years of women leadership stepping up in the NFL, because when we have all genders across the fandom, we need to have that same representation in the front office and on the field.
And yeah, this does lead off our NFL news because of how important it is, but I think I'm going to reference back to a quote we said back when we were talking last offseason about Carl Nassib coming out as gay, where we hope that there comes to be a point where this isn't even news, and this is just like the headline, at least of the news, isn't black female NFL president. It's they hired this person and it doesn't matter. So I think we're slowly getting to that
100%.
point, but as for now, we're still in this situation. I still think it's a great move, and yes, she is very qualified for the position. We wish her luck here from the Couch GMs. But another big news on the week, we had a couple of trades. If you didn't hear this one, I don't know if you've been living under a rock since last week. This was the traditional, of course, it came out right after we recorded our last episode. Baker Mayfield was traded from the Cleveland Browns to the Carolina Panthers. So the Browns will be getting a conditional 4th or 5th round pick, depending on his usage. And the Browns are even paying part of Baker Mayfield's salary in the deal. The Panthers going out there and getting a strong contender for their quarterback competition for what could seemingly be free, honestly, when you consider that he should win the starting job over Sam Darnold. They do say it's going to be a competition, though.
Yeah, and I think they mean it. I think the Panthers really do like Sam Darnold. Like, they gave up a lot to get him. They gave him his 5th-year option. But I don't think they were blown away that they weren't willing to bring in some competition. Hopefully it's the old adage, iron sharpens iron. We get to see these guys, but I think a lot of people forget how good Baker Mayfield was 2 seasons ago. And then he was just so injury riddled and put everything on the line to try to help Cleveland. And then the whole drama with that aspect of it. But it is interesting to me that Baker Mayfield could potentially be their week 1 starter when they face the Cleveland Browns and be getting paid almost $600,000 by the Browns to essentially play to beat him. So that's going to be a fun storyline. We have Russell Wilson going back, or I don't know if it's going back or playing Denver in week 1, and now we have Baker Mayfield playing the Cleveland Browns in week 1 as well. So a lot of good action. Maybe the schedule makers knew something back in early April, early May, late April when they came out with the schedule that this was bound to happen eventually.
I think there was always the feeling that Seattle was not interested in Baker Mayfield, so the most logical target was the Panthers. So it was kind of a good guess, but the most logical landing spot at the same time. And since we are a fantasy football podcast, I think we have to talk a little bit of fantasy impact on this one. So I don't think this really has any effect on someone like a Christian McCaffrey who's going to get uses regardless. But I'm interested in your thoughts on the wide receiver room in Carolina. I know we're saying that it's not Baker Mayfield's job for sure, but I think in historical terms, Baker Mayfield has had more success than Sam Darnold. Do you think this gives a boost to Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, or do you kind of keep them where we were at in our wide receiver rankings?
I mean, I think it gives them a boost if Baker wins the job. Now, I know, like, if there's so much question or hesitation to if he wins the job, why would it give you a boost? And that's just because I think Baker is, the better quarterback. Now, I'm probably one of the bigger Sam Darnold supporters here, so I think it's going to be a very tough competition. I think it's going to come down to they might not even announce the starter until Wednesday of week 1. Like, that's how long we might have to wait. So it's hard to evaluate which quarterback might be the guy going into the draft. So I wouldn't give it like a huge bump because I think Sam Darnold has a realistic shot of winning the job. But I do think if Baker is the starting quarterback, especially DJ Moore, I think he's the guy that I'm most would be even more excited about. I think he's, a sleeper. People don't really want a lot of pieces outside of Christian McCaffrey or that Panthers offense. But DJ Moore is a very explosive, a very good wide receiver. And I think I like his potential as a, breakout candidate this year, no matter the quarterback, but I like it even more if it is Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I'm with you that I think I would give him a slight boost if I know for sure. I actually did bump him up 1 or 2 spots in our rankings, which are being updated all the time on the couchgms.com. So go back and check it out. But I did
It's a
give him
good
a bump of
resource when
1 or
you're
2
drafting.
spots. Definitely. And like Cody said last week, you can kind of get an idea of our play styles and, use our personal rankings or our consensus, however you feel. But I did bump him up a little bit just from hearing about this trade because I do think that Baker Mayfield will win the job, but I think I'll be a little bit more confident to bump him up maybe 1 or 2 spots. I have him currently at 14. So I have a chance. There's a chance I can bump him to a borderline wide receiver run around like number 12 if I hear that Baker Mayfield's the guy and I see some good stuff out of them in training camp and in the preseason. So we'll see how that adjusts as we get closer. There was other wide receiver news. Just on Tuesday, N'Keal Harry was traded from the New England Patriots to the Chicago Bears for a 7th-round pick. Now, there's some people that say this could be a good move for N'Keal Harry, but I don't know if this really makes much of an impact in any kind of football sense. Like, I think he's going to make the Bears roster, don't get me wrong, but I don't see him being fantasy relevant or taking any kind of, targets away from anyone else on that offense.
Yeah, this kind of like a trade that, if you weren't paying attention, it gets brushed under the rug. It is pretty interesting. I thought a lot of N'Keal Harry when he's coming out, so it's unfortunate to see that he didn't, maintain that, level of being a former first round pick. But the Bears, there's a lot of question marks with their wide receiver room. I mean, Darnell Mooney, you know what he's going to do. But, N'Keal Harry could easily be wide receiver 2 on this team, and he could easily be wide receiver 6. Like, he fits right in with where they're at right now. So I'm not like running out to draft him. Maybe if you're doing the best ball league and you really liked him coming out, you think the change of scenery is going to be nice, grab him in your last round in a best ball league. And a name you can keep an eye on or keep in the back of your mind that, hey, he might actually have some potential as you move throughout the season. But, he's on the same playing field right now for me as like a guy like Equinemius St. Brown, who in a redraft league, even in a dynasty league, like I'm not going to go out. He's not a priority. He's not a guy I'm going to, get. And we're talking potential Bears wide receiver 2 coming into the season.
Man, I never even thought of the name Equinemius St. Brown in a while here. So, Yeah, that just shows you exactly where he is at right now. It doesn't hurt to take like a last round flyer, even in a redraft. If you are drafting super early and you're not going to take a kicker, and if you realize that he's going to be buried in the depth chart, you can drop him before the season starts also. But I like your idea of just saying like in best balls, taking him at the very end of the draft. That makes sense. It's worth a shot at least. A little bit of free agency news before we finish this up. The Ravens have agreed to terms with outside linebacker Justin Houston on a one-year deal. That is a re-sign. He was there the last, I believe, 1 or 2 seasons. So the Ravens still trying to put some complementary pieces in their defense. And then we also have some jersey news going on here. The Houston Texans, we talked about helmets actually last week. The Houston Texans announced a new, what they call battle red helmet that will be worn week 9 versus the Eagles. I think it looks sleek. It looks
It
more
looks
like a
nice.
cherry red kind of to me rather than a traditional red you'd see on a helmet. I like it.
It's been retweeted on the Couch GMs Twitter. If you haven't seen it, go check it out.
Definitely. So nice to see some cool new looks that are going to be coming out of this whole new helmet rule. And then finally, so Cody and I have not practiced this one. We're going to give a little disclaimer before we go in. The Pittsburgh Steelers no longer are playing in Heinz Field. They changed their stadium name to Acrisure Stadium. Acrisure? Does that seem right?
Uh, Acrisure. I was hoping it was like Arcsure, and then they can call it the Arc, but I'm 98% sure that's not right. Accusure. Like I feel like it's like a play on accuracy and insurance. And they kind of like put the two words together. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that Heinz is no longer the sponsor. Like Heinz Field, like that's like a obviously Heinz is like a big name in Pittsburgh, and it's an
Mhm.
actual company. It's not like Lambeau Field was named after a player, even though some young Steelers fans might think Heinz Field was named after Heinz Ward. But it is
It's not
unfortunate
spelled the
when
same, I don't think, though.
it's definitely not. But
No.
some people might have thought that. But it is unfortunate when these long-lasting stadiums are changing names, and especially to names like you have never heard of. I mean, obviously someone has because it's a big insurance company that can buy the namings rights. But it's not like a national brand like a Geico or um, State Farm or Allstate or Liberty Mutual. See, that was for you
I'm
guys.
glad you said Liberty Bibberty, and I hope it was on purpose.
It was Winky. But just like I almost wish in a way they could have somehow worked out a deal that it was like Arcshire Stadium at Heinz Field because it feels so connected to Pittsburgh. Obviously, they can't do that because that's again another company, but that's what they're going to do with Arrowhead when they give the naming rights away for that one.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, we still don't know how to pronounce it after all that. But
I'm
the
going
Steelers
with
have a new.
Acrisure, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll go with Acrisure. The Steelers have a new stadium in the same location, just the name changed. But
Yes.
George, before we hop out of NFL news, I do want to circle back to the Sam Darnold trade for just a second. Now
Okay.
that Darnold's been traded, or sorry, Baker Mayfield, Sam
Mhm.
Darnold's the guy he's fighting it, but the
Yes.
Baker Mayfield trade, I think the big question mark around potential quarterbacks is it feels like most teams have their guy. But
Hmm.
what about Jimmy G? Do you still expect him to be moved this offseason? Do you think is he the Sam Bradford? If a quarterback goes down in training camp, then he, becomes the guy that everybody wants. If not, he just rides it out on the 49ers roster.
Man, I'm even questioning now. This doesn't look like a good look for we have Trey Lance ranked fairly high, and I think a lot of that has to do with his big playmaking ability and the ability to run with the ball. But I'm not even 100% sure that Jimmy Garoppolo won't be the starter for the 49ers. Like, I've heard so many
Okay.
mixed reports of like that Trey Lance is not progressing as fast as they wish he would, and I mean, this would all just be like, drama talk that comes out from the media for clicks. You never really know until you see it get into the season, see him play. But that combined with the fact that they haven't traded Garoppolo yet makes me think that there's still a chance that he could start for the 49ers this year. And that would throw a wrench in everything. But I
For sure.
think the most likely scenario if he does get traded is probably the Sam Bradford, kind of, he could get traded with an injury in training camp or potentially even a mid-season trade if a team gets very desperate and something happens in the first few weeks. That's possible too. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. unless Seattle makes a move, which there's no way that they're going to be able to pay San Francisco enough to make an in-division trade for a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, but if you have your guy, like you could recuperate some of the draft capital you gave up. We did see the Eagles trade McNabb to the Washington football team, which is now the Commanders, and that wasn't their name when it was traded. But in division trades for quarterbacks have happened. It is definitely rare, and I feel like they would have to pay a little bit more than they'd get anywhere else to get him. So I don't see that one happening. But it feels like that's the only fit left. Seattle's the big question mark. Atlanta, they have a rookie. They have Mariota. They're not going to. That was the other team I was thinking, but it'll be interesting to see what Jimmy G does. And he was a midseason trade when he went to San Francisco, so he might be another midseason trade a
Is that
quarterback.
the
But
same season that he went on like a 6-game win streak?
is that what happened? I think that's what
I
happened.
believe it is. So whatever team does make an in-season trade for Jimmy Garoppolo has a chance to make the playoffs. Just saying.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, why don't we get into our tight end rankings?
Yes, we're jumping into tight ends this week. So Tyler is not with us, but his rankings are still up on the couchgms.com, and we'll still mention them as we talk about our consensus rankings for tight ends. We are going 1 to 15 on the website. We have up to, I believe it's 33, because Cody felt the need to add back in Rob Gronkowski, who has now retired, but he's not convinced. So we're going to go step by. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to go step by step here, breaking down each of our top 15, and we can jump right into number 1 and the consensus number 1. Even though it's a little bit of a different look in Kansas City, we're saying Travis Kelce is still tight end 1 for fantasy.
Oh, this is the easiest debate. I mean, or not even a debate. The easiest. Travis Kelce is the number 1 tight end in fantasy. He's going to be drafted number 1. He's gone. If you're in a 12-man team, like, don't be surprised if he goes in the first round. Like, we were having that conversation last year. Is Travis Kelce worth a first-round pick with Tyreek Hill on the roster? Now Tyreek Hill is not there. And they still have good pieces around him. They still have McCole Hardman. They still have MVS and Juju Smith-Schuster, who they brought in this offseason. Obviously, none of them are Tyreek Hill, but Travis Kelce is going to be the focal point. He had 130 targets last year. That number could increase to like the 150 range that we saw Mark Andrews with.
Which would be insane with a tight end, yeah.
He is like the clear-cut number 1. It's just, are you willing to pay the price? Because you're probably missing out on a top wide receiver or a top running back to get him. That's where you, in fantasy, you really have to value. Is Travis Kelce worth the number 1 pick when you can get a guy that we have ranked 5 or 6 rounds later?
Exactly. Just because those tiers are so skewed in the tight end rankings, because people want that consistent number 1 tight end because of how, we talk about the tight end dartboard. Maybe we'll even have the thumbnail for this video be the tight end dartboard, because that was such our thing last year. But I was trying to experiment with like, oh, maybe this could be a reason that Travis Kelce doesn't do that well in that. The only thing I even came up with was, since Tyreek Hill's not there to stretch the field, maybe teams will be playing up on the ball more, and they'll have to try to take away some of those short routes. And then you just remember the fact they still have Mecole Hardman. They drafted Sky Moore. Like, defenses still have to respect the speed on that team and that wide receiver room. And
he had
MVS, yeah, you're right.
Stats last year, like they are obviously going to miss the production of Tyreek Hill, but they still have field stretchers, and
they're just going to run Travis Kelce out 10 yards, let everyone run past him, and he's going to catch the ball like he always does. It seems like clockwork.
Yeah, and it's still Andy Reid dialing up plays for him. He'll still get your occasional, wildcat that he runs it in down at the red zone. Like, Travis Kelce is the easiest number 1 pick. And honestly, as a person that doesn't like to take tight ends, he is a guy that, especially if you're like sitting at that, 12, 13 turn, like if a running back falls to you and you can get Travis Kelce, look at him as a wide receiver 1. Like, honestly, like, compare him more to a Devontae Adams or a Cooper Kupp, like a guy that is going to get volume, that is definitely going in the first round. So if you can get your running back around that turn, go for Travis Kelce. If you want to put him in the first round and take the running back in the second round, just say that you took a tight end first and won your league, like, Travis Kelce is the guy that can do that.
Definitely. And I think there is one more tight end that could be in that range, and that's our number 2 and actually consensus number 2, and that's Mark Andrews. I'm not saying I'd draft him as high as Travis Kelce. Like, I'd love Travis Kelce on that turn. Mark Andrews could be going similar in draft position, though, because he was, I believe, for a long stretch of last season, the tight end 1 in scoring. Um, Now, hopefully, you're bringing back Lamar Jackson, who will hopefully stay healthy. And they seem to, when Lamar Jackson was in the game last year, be trying to put more of an emphasis on the pass. And he's obviously more comfortable throwing those short routes, which is Mark Andrews' thing. They also vacated some targets when they traded Hollywood Brown to Arizona. So there's a good chance that he could still be pacing with or near Travis Kelce in scoring, just like last year. I just think because of the uncertainty and the not having Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball, that's why he is still my number 2. But he definitely deserves to be in the top 2.
Oh, 100%. Like, I know we just talked of Travis Kelce, but Mark Andrews scored 25 more fantasy points than Travis Kelce did last year with over 100 receptions, over 154 targets. And I know we're in the offseason where everybody's getting hyped, but we've heard the rumors, the inklings. Oh, Lamar Jackson, he's tightened up his throwing motion. He's going to show up to camp at 220 instead of 205, looking more ready to be more of a passer, you know, not run as much, protect his body. Like, those things are going to start to happen. Obviously, he's still going to have his electrifying plays, but they are going to look to throw more. And Mark Andrews is another guy that, you don't have. Some people be like, well, who else do they have? You don't trust any of their wide receivers. Is it Rashad Bateman, their, former first round pick from last year? Is it Devin Duvernay? Is it someone else? The defense can just take away Mark Andrews, but Mark Andrews is an elite player that you can't take away. You can never double team. Again, this is another guy you're looking more like a wide receiver. You can't double team Cooper Kupp. You can't double team Travis Kelce. You can't double team Devontae Adams. They get theirs, and Mark Andrews is another guy that will get his as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's just no other way to put it. And I think that these two are tier 1 this year. Like, I know in the past years it's been like a 3 or 4 man top tier, and you had like people like George Kittle and Darren Waller up there. But I think this year it's Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews is tier 1. And then we're going to move into tier 2 as we go down to our number 3. A little bit of a difference in rankings here. Finally, Cody has him at 3, Tyler and I at 4, Kyle Pitts. Man, if this guy scored touchdowns last year, could you imagine how many points he actually would have scored? But instead, he just decided to score like 3 all season, but he had a
One.
bazillion yards, it seemed like. Oh, yeah, 1, and it wasn't even on American soil. That's what it was.
Yes.
But he had like a bazillion yards, and he was getting targeted all over the place. He's now dealing with either Marcus Mariota at quarterback or a rookie. I think they're going to lean on the tight end a lot, especially because not only is he a tight end, he's their best wide receiver, I think, too. This could be a dream scenario for Kyle Pitts, and obviously having him in the top 5 in tight end shows that we have some faith that he's going to turn it in.
Yeah, I know this is a big increase from last year. He finished as tight end 9, and the big part of that was touchdowns, but he only had 1. He was the third guy with over 1,000 yards, only behind Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, and he was one of 4 tight ends to have. Or I'm sorry, he was third in targets. He was one of 5 tight ends to have 100+ targets last year, and that was a team that it did struggle to score. So the touchdowns are the big question mark. But you expect that second year jump. They always say the tight end position is the hardest to translate to the NFL, that and cornerback. And he came in and balled out. He's the number 1 guy. There's no Calvin Ridley this year. I know Calvin Ridley missed a handful of games last year, but he is the number 1 guy. And I think he is that same type of play style that he can go out and get his. And he's a guy that you might want. Now, he's not being drafted till his ADP right now, overall player, is 30. So a guy that could put up Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews numbers, you're getting, 18 picks later. It's still a high premium for a guy that has so many question marks. So he's, if you don't be the guy that feels like you missed out, you have to go get him. But if he, falls into that 4th round, like Kyle Pitts could be a league winner this year just because of the amount of volume he's expected.
Oh, totally. We're just hoping he doesn't become the next Julio Jones, but I still like having him in this tier 2 of tight ends because I know he's going to get targets. I know he's going to get yards. It is just all that uncertainty and question marks, which is why I have him below our next guy. I can just jump us right into number 4. And Cody has him at 5, Tyler and I at 3. So Tyler and I both think that he's better than Kyle Pitts just a little bit. It's George Kittle. I think the biggest knock on Kittle in the last few years has to be injuries. If he can stay on the field, every time that he's come back from an injury and been healthy, he just puts up points. There's no denying that it still has it, and I love him still. It's just he has almost as many question marks as Pitts because you hope that he stays on the field, and it hasn't been happening.
Yeah, George Kittle. I mean, I'm obviously the odd man out, kind of, because I have him at 5, but I do think there is very much a tier here. There's a tier 1 of Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, like we were mentioning, and then Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, and then the next 2 guys I think are in tier 2. That's just for me. George
Mm-hmm.
Kittle, he did miss some games last year, but he played in 14 games and still finished as tight end 4. So when he's on the field, he is dynamic. He's electric. He makes plays. My question marks, which is why I have him at 5, and again, that's not a bad position to have him, is injury for sure. Is it Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo? We talked about that a little bit in the news segment. If it's Trey Lance, I do think the passing numbers are going to take a hit. I think he would have a better season with Jimmy G because I think Jimmy G is, as of right now, a more refined passer. I think Trey Lance has all the potential in the world. He was my favorite guy coming out last year, but he has to put the whole package together. And I think the offense could take a little dip. It'll be very much, a run first team. They have Elijah Mitchell, they have Trey Sermon, and they still drafted a 3rd round running back this year. So Kyle Shanahan likes to run the ball, likes to run play action. He likes to get his tight end open. So George Kittle is still a valuable option. So I see why you guys have him at 3, but that's why I have him down at 5.
Yeah, I was trying to actually go back quick and see what games they both played on the field together. So I'm seeing near the end of the season, they both played the same game against Houston. George Kittle had 1 catch on 2 targets. Not too great of a look there. Back in November, he had a 4 catch for 34 yard and a touchdown game. So not really something that blows you away. Like, it does concern me a little bit if it's Trey Lance in an offense, but we're also, if Trey Lance is starting, we're hoping Trey Lance makes a jump. So it's not going to be exactly the same as last year. And I think if he doesn't make that jump, that's when you see the situation, like you said, where Jimmy Garoppolo could be starting. So I'm not too worried about George Kittle, but definitely question marks is why he's not in tier 1 this year like he has been in the past few years.
Yeah, and I also think with that being said, and we can transition this into who we have at number 5 with Darren Waller, another guy that's been normally in that tier 1. We used to call it the big 4. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not that I don't think that either of these guys have gotten worse. I just think the volume and the opportunity for the top 2 guys have made the gap a little bit. I think this is not as big of year, tier 1 to tier 2 is not as big of a gap as it has been in the years past.
Definitely.
So I think there is some value there. But Darren Waller, Tyler and George have him at 5. I have him at 6. So again, I'm a little bit lower for him. Again, coming off injury, a little bit of question marks with his health. And then they had the big acquisition of Devontae Adams. They still have Hunter Renfrow, who had a boatload of targets last year. Where are they not going to feed Devontae Adams? He might not get as many targets as he saw in Green Bay, but I still expect him to get his. Hunter Renfrow, honestly, could be a wide receiver 2, borderline wide receiver 1 with Devontae Adams this year. There's just a lot more mouths to feed. I think he is in the most crowded of the top 5, playmaking options, where he might honestly be option number 3 now, where 2 years ago he was option number 1, which is why I think he's dropped a little bit.
Oh, 100%. You took the words right out of my mouth, basically, because when he was starting off to actually, hit his stride in Vegas, he was that number 1 target. He was basically the only established pass catcher they had on that team for a while, and that's why he was dominating so much. There were games we saw him getting 22 targets, and it was like, what is happening? And then once Hunter Renfrow broke out, they also had a little bit of a time where Henry Ruggs was playing pretty well last year. It's like the look stopped going his way. And this might just be a hit on the type of offense, but it might also be a hit on Derek Carr to an extent. Derek Carr's great at, keeping a team in a game, winning a game, but is he good enough and given the reins enough to, support three solid pass catchers for fantasy? And like you said, Waller might end up being option 3 now in that offense. So it's a little bit concerning to see like he might not get the targets that he needs to be as good as he has been in the past. And it's skill that still has him up where he's at for me in number 5. But I'm worried it might be more like a 7 or an 8 by the end of the season, depending on how the targets shake out in the offense.
Yeah, this is definitely, a great, thought. But don't forget, it was rumored that he was in the trade package going back to Green Bay for Devontae Adams until they were like, "Oh, you can't an unsigned franchise tag player, you can only trade picks." And then that's how it became a second round pick. It was supposed to be first in Waller, and then it became a first in the second. Um, so it is interesting that, whether I know they've all denied the rumors now because he's on the team, you don't want to, but you have to think, I trust the people that are reporting it that so you have to think, hey, they saw a pathway if they got Devontae Adams without needing Darren Waller. So that's why it hesitates me. He's a guy I'm not drafting this year unless he like goes on a super fall because I just think the other two guys are going to be better options. And then a thing I haven't heard a lot of people talk about is their new head coach, Josh McDaniels, whether that was talent, whether that was player personnel, but even, into like the last couple of years of Tom Brady, that became more of a run first team in New England. Now, they have two pretty capable backs in Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. Like, how much of this run game is still going to be involved? Is it going to be? I don't expect it to be, a pass happy Andy Reid offense, despite their weapons. I think it'll be pretty balanced. And again, if you're now, if you're still trying to run the ball 20 times a game, you got to get Devontae his 15 targets. You got to get Hunter Renfrow his 10. That's 45 plays right there that have run up. So now Darren Waller has just such a smaller piece of the pie. His talent has all the capability. Like if he ends the season as tight end 1, he has the talent to do it. But for me, there's definitely a lot of hesitation around Darren Waller.
Yeah, because I think also we're going to be comparing this offense to the Eagles' offense in a lot of cases too. A lot of talent, a lot of points that could be scored, but do we envision them being a top 10 offense? They really could not be. So someone somewhere's got to suffer in fantasy for that, and we just have to try to pinpoint where.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the Raiders will be a top 10 offense if, people stay healthy. And like, I think the Raiders are a sneakily good team. It's a gauntlet of a division,
Mhm.
but if they win the division, I wouldn't be surprised. I think they have the potential. I would pick the Chargers out of the big 3 there. I know Denver is like the kind of like the really big mystery question there with it being Russell Wilson's first year, but I know they're all 4 really good teams and they
Mhm.
all, there's going to be some high scoring games probably. So I think that'll help favor
Mhm.
Darren Waller. Like they could be, a top 10 offense with a losing record because they've just played so many good teams. So he has the potential, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting debate. I do like the Eagles comparison too, because in that situation, which we can talk about Dallas Goedert in a little bit, but like he still seems like he is the number 2, maybe even the number 1 guy. With Darren Waller, it's like Hunter Renfrow or him. Which guy is number 2? And after
Yep.
last year, I think it's Hunter Renfrow.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Because Hunter Renfrow was absolutely amazing down the stretch last year, being a top 10 in wide receivers. But I'm very interested to see the next guy on our list. So I have to talk to Cody here. He has Dalton Schultz ranked at number 4 in his rankings. Tyler has him at 6. I have him at 7. So I put him at the consensus of number 6. You are very high on Dalton Schultz. I want to hear why.
All right. Now I hate talking about this because a lot of the people that listen to this podcast, I play fantasy football with. And Dalton Schultz is the tight end this year that I want in as many leagues as possible. Um, Now, it's no surprise to everybody last year that he finished number 3, tight end number 3. I wanted to make sure I had that right. He finished as tight end number 3 with 104 targets and 78 receptions. Now, you're like, okay, well, how is he going to repeat that? Amari Cooper, he also had 104 targets last year, and he's no longer there. Currently, their number 2 wide receiver is Michael Gallup. We don't even know if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. Probably not. When is he going to come back and play? Behind him is Noah Brown and rookie second-round pick Jalen Tolbert. They franchise tagged him for a reason. They want to get a long-term deal down. Whether that will happen, you have to find out next week, because I think the franchise tag extension passes. We can tell you who got a new deal and who didn't. But Dalton Schultz, he finished tight end number 3 last year, and there's 104 targets in that Cowboys offense, essentially, that are now up for grabs. Would not be surprised to see him pushing the 130, maybe even the 150. I have Dalton Schultz 4 because he's a guy that I can still see being tight end 1 and would not be surprised at all.
I mean, I definitely could see him at tight end 1, at a tight end 1, because I have him at 7. I just think I like the guy at number 6 a little bit better. I just don't know, like, he had a fantastic season last year, and I still think like he overplayed. But because of the situation you said where they freed up so many targets in that offense, they are obviously going to score all these points. I still think he's going to be solid, but I don't know if he's going to really have be able to improve much more, because I almost feel like last year seemed too good to be true for a guy that was considered a tight end 2 for most of his career until last year. Even when he had a chance 2 years ago, he wasn't super special. Like, I'm kind of worried it was a career year, but he can still benefit and be a tight end 1 because of the way that offense plays out.
No, I think last year was his breakout year. Like, I already mentioned it. Tight end is notorious for being the hardest offensive position to translate from college. It takes time, and it's so hard to predict which tight ends are going to be good and which tight ends are going to be not pan out. That's why it's rare to see a tight end drafted so high. That's why I have Kyle Pitt. I mean, you take a tight end in the top 5, you expect him to be, out of this world good. And
Mm-hmm.
I have Dalton Schultz right behind a guy like Kyle Pitts this year, because for me, the opportunity, it's still Kellen. It's that same offense coming back. It's Dak Prescott. They had a connection last year. It's also, I think, if you listen to our wide receiver rankings, I was the highest on CeeDee Lamb. I had him as, a top 10 wide receiver, and I think pretty high for me. CeeDee Lamb was wide receiver 6 for me. So I'm expecting Dak Prescott. I expect them to be the 2 guys in this offense that really propel it, be a playoff team, put up those points. Dalton Schultz was only, he didn't quite hit that 10-point per game average. Only 2 guys did, and I would expect him to be around that 10 points a game average this year. So maybe I'm a little too high on him. I would love if Snyder was able to make it with us to hear his thoughts, because he, has him tied with you. But definitely interested to see how that one pans out. And I
Let me
think
also
there's not.
just jump in here quick. There was actually 5 tight ends last year that hit that 10-point average. It's just Rob Gronkowski only played 12 games and George Kittle played 14.
Gotcha. And I also don't think I was looking at half point PPR, which we tend to base our rankings at. But because if you do half point PPR, he was right at 10. So that is correct. So he still had that 10-point average. Definitely it would be interesting to see. And then with Dalton Schultz too, he's still going low enough that you can grab him, pick 63. You've already have your top 2 running backs. You already have your top 2 wide receivers. Like, the value for him where he's currently at now, he is starting to slowly go back up. Like, I think a lot of people are getting on this train. He is going higher and higher. But I would much rather have Dalton Schultz over a guy like Darren Waller, who will be the number 2 option on a team, potentially number 1. Like, CeeDee Lamb hasn't proven that he could be the number 1 guy. Those are both guys fighting to be the number 1 option on a team.
I mean, I totally get it, but if his draft stock and his ADP is going to keep going up so high, I think I would rather take a chance on some of our next few guys. I can use that to transition us into number 7, and that's Lions tight end TJ Hawkinson. Cody and Tyler both have him at 7. I have him at 8. I like Hawkinson. The only problem seems to be inconsistency with him. He'll put up 15 points a couple of weeks, and then he'll put up 2, and repeat. So he finished right behind Dalton Schultz in average points per game last year, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, he was at 9.6, right behind Dalton Schultz, 10 flat. So he is a solid tight end. He's no one to write home about. He's not somebody I would try to stretch and reach for in a draft, but he obviously has potential. And if that Lions offense takes a little bit of a step, maybe he takes a step with it, because he's finally not the only weapon in that offense that might help him.
Yeah, definitely it might help him. And he only played in, was it 12 games last year? So we didn't actually get to see him like really play with Amon St. Brown when he had his breakout. DeAndre Swift was battling injuries at the end of the season too. Like we didn't get to see this whole cohesive unit too. So I think TJ Hawkinson is interesting, is a fun potential guy to play. He's actually going a little bit higher than Dalton Schultz if we're looking at ADP right now. Um, so a lot of people are still liking him ahead of a guy like Dalton Schultz, and I think that's a little too rich for my blood. But TJ Hawkinson, Jared Goff, we've seen him put up numbers before. That offense is getting better. I still think we're a year away from the Detroit Lions really taking off. But I think we're going to start to see them ascend to a team that could potentially push to well, it can't be 500 anymore because of the extra game. But if they finish 7-9 or 9-7, I guess theoretically they could finish 8-1 and be a 500 team. So I'm going to say they're going to be a 500 team at 8-1.
Oh, we're calling ties now in preseason? That's something.
We're not even
the
to
tie
preseason.
should just.
Camp hasn't even started.
You're right. Before the preseason even happens, we're calling ties. I think ties shouldn't even be a thing, but that's a discussion for another whole, just another whole show because we can probably go on and on about that again with the overtime rules. So I think there is a lot of question marks that go with Hawkinson. I do think that he could be someone on the rise, but there's also the worry of him getting lost in the shuffle with them, revamping all those weapons around him in Detroit too, which is why he's not any higher than 7 on our consensus. And number 8 on our consensus is somebody who's finally going to start the season as a tight end 1, and that's Dallas Goedert for the Philadelphia Eagles. Cody and Tyler have him at 8, and call me a homer all you want, I have him at 6. So I have him above Dalton Schultz and TJ Hawkinson. This right here is that tier 3 for me, those 3 right there. And I like Goddard the best because he was great down the stretch after they traded Zach Ertz. And like Cody said earlier, with Waller, he might be like the third option in that offense. It still seems like Goddard is number 1 or number 2 in that offense. So I think there's going to be targets that are always going to be going to the tight end. He doesn't have to worry about fighting A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. He's still going to have his piece of the playbook.
Yeah, I hear you, but I am going to call you a little bit of a homer. Now, if they didn't make the A.J. Brown trade, I would think that, this makes a little bit more sense. But with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, like he has the opportunity to still be, the number 2 or 1 option, but he'll probably end up being the number 3 option. And I've already been on record on how I don't really trust Jalen Hurts as a passer. Maybe passing to a tight end will be easier for him. So I do think George is right in the sense of highlighting that he has a high variance of where he could finish on as target 1 to target 3 on this team. If Hurts is liking the wide receivers, he'll be 3. If he's liking Goddard, he'll be 1. So there is definitely the variance for him still to be there, but I think it'll be the higher percentage would be that he'd be the target 3 or maybe like split tied for second right behind Devontae Smith, guarding that A.J. Brown stays healthy. So definitely an interesting name. I am going to call Georgia homer, like I said. And I would also want to say that Dalton Schultz is in my tier 2. I know you put him in your tier 3, but he is in my tier 2, obviously, since he's number 4.
I get that because Kittle's also number 5 in your tier 3. Well, yeah, whatever. But I guess it's worth noting Dallas Goedert is going about a round and a half later than Schultz and Hawkinson. So that's somebody that I'm go ahead and throw out that to everyone that plays against me in fantasy. Goddard's somebody that I'm looking at a lot, like Cody is looking at a lot of Dalton Schultz, because I think the value for that pick is really high. He's got an average draft position of, I think it's 80 right now. So getting that in around 7, 8, I think is a great value for somebody who has a chance to be a top 5 tight end if the offense shakes out in his direction.
Yeah, and this might be a bold take, but after Dallas Goedert goes, there's not truly another tight end that I would say that's the guy I want. For me, those are the top 8. And after the top 8, like I'm probably taking my tight end, around when people are taking their kickers. Like I'm going to take a high upside guy, but there's not a consistent option that I'm going to be in love with. George might be like, I can't believe you're not including the guy at number 9, which is Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. And don't hear what I'm not saying. Like Dawson Knox could easily be another, top 5 tight end. He has the potential. That's a high-powered offense. Um, we have to wait and see if he's going to be on Josh Allen's fantasy team again this year.
If
He
he's
did
on
have
Josh
nine.
Allen's fantasy team, he gets a bump.
Correct. He did have 9 touchdowns last year. Some games that was like his saving grace, and a lot of times that's what the saving grace for any tight end is. So that's not just Dawson Knox, but he seemed to be more of a red zone guy. And with the emergence of Gabriel Davis, with them bringing in OJ Howard, with another year with Stephon Diggs, losing Brian Daboll, there might not be as much creativity to get him open. We'll have to wait and see on that offense. He puts him right out of my guys that I am targeting if I'm going to draft a tight end. Um, but if Dawson Knox would somehow fall, to round 13 or 14, like okay, I might be interested at that point because he is still a very well sought after player.
And I'm actually with you when it comes to that top 8 is that, top for me. And after that, I'm waiting. And there's a chance that someone like a Dawson Knox falls down to round 12, 13 in your leagues because if you're drafting right, you most likely aren't going to draft 2 tight ends. Some teams are going to, especially when they're drafting a tight end later, they'll try to take 2 guys and see like, oh, maybe one of these 2 will break out. So you might see in a 10-team league like 13, 14 tight ends go. And having him all the way down here at number 9, I'm okay with, if I'm not going to put any stock into that position, taking a Dawson Knox because we know that he has a chance to go off every single week. But there is a chance because of how crowded that, all that wide receiver room and now even the tight end room is. He's more like a Hunter Henry, who's someone we're going to talk about in a few picks, who is basically just relying on touchdowns. I hope not, because Dawson Knox was one of the saviors of, he graduated from the dartboard. He actually made the tight end position a little bit more consistent last year, but it's not looking great for me going into this year. I'm not confident enough to put him out of dartboard territory.
I'm right there with you, and I'll say the same thing about who we have at number 10, who is Zach Ertz. And Zach Ertz did finish as tight end 5 last year. He got to
Mhm.
Arizona and played really well, and they don't have DeAndre Hopkins for the first 6 games. Like, he could be a guy that starts the season very hot. Um, but for me, he's back to being like Zach Ertz, all-time Eagle, great player. Like, I'm a little worried age might be catching up to him. We kind of saw him slow down a little bit at the end of last season. Um, he wasn't that same productive as he was when he first got to Arizona. He doesn't have that same breakaway speed, doesn't have that same, uh, you know, athleticism that he had as a younger player. But don't get me wrong, he's still a very solid option. And he's a guy that, like, I have him at 10 because he's not my top 8. And unfortunately, I some people might get a steal with Zach Ertz, and I'm okay
Mhm.
to admit that I might be completely wrong. He might be up there in top 5 again, especially with no DeAndre Hopkins. But for me, when you get to this point, like, I'd rather take a flyer on a younger guy coming off injury, or a younger guy on a new team that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So for me, that's why he's a little bit lower. Again, he has all the potential to be in that top 8, but just between age, how much do we like the Cardinals? Like, do I still have a bad taste from that end of the season, falling apart kind of again? We'll have to see. He's not the new toy in Arizona anymore. He's been with the team now for a while. So again, nothing against Zach Ertz. I really like the player a lot, but it is hard to get excited about him this upcoming fantasy season.
Oh yeah, I'm agreeing with you. And I love Zach Ertz more than the next guy probably, but he was never a run after catch kind of tight end. This man was a PPR monster. And I don't see him being a PPR monster outside of the first 6 weeks, possibly. Because DeAndre Hopkins being out, he might eat more of those targets at the beginning of the season. And he might end up being a bigger trade high candidate than Marquise Brown is even. There's a chance that that's even a thing because people are always going to be out there looking for that, top tight end. And he could start the season very hot. And then all of a sudden, when Hopkins comes back, he goes back down to getting his 5 to 6 targets a game. He catches 3 or 4. You got to have him hope he gets a touchdown for him to be fantasy relevant. And it's like, well, at any time he could get that touchdown, but he's not a big play run after catch kind of tight end. This man catches touchdowns and he catches a lot of passes. Volume is the way that he was always getting points in Philly. And when he wasn't able to get that volume because of how the team is using it, he did have a down year or two throughout his career because of it. And then he gets 120 catches in a year, and that's the years where like, oh, this is Zach Ertz.
Yeah, and he did have 112 catches last year, or targets, not catches, targets.
Mm-hmm.
5 touchdowns, almost 800 yards. So very productive season. Like those are great uh, tight end points, tight end stats that you're looking for a guy. So strong value. Like, and honestly, like if you take Kyler Murray and then you can get Zach Ertz pretty late, like that's a nice stack to have. You know, stacks don't always have to be running backs or wide receivers. So he's a guy like if you get Kyler Murray, you might want to target him over a Dawson Knox or someone like that because then you have, you know, that connection. Um, but George, that wraps up our top 10. So why don't we do something a little bit different because the show is getting a little long and we're talking tight ends. And I feel like we can say the same thing about guys 11 through 15. So I'm just going to rattle them off
Okay.
of who we are, and then we can go through and talk about who we want to. I think that might be a little bit more fun because they all have their high variance points. But at number 11 is Pat Fryermuth. Number 12 is the touchdown machine from a year ago, Hunter Henry. 13 is a guy I'm really interested in Irv Smith Jr. Noah Fant, the new guy in Seattle at 14. And 15 to wrap up our top 15 is Gerald Everett at the Los Angeles Chargers. George, is there any guy on that list, 11 through 15, that you really want to talk about?
I do want to talk about Pat Fryermuth a little bit because I think if Ben Roethlisberger was still there, or if they had a more solid quarterback than Mitch Trubisky or a rookie, I would have Pat Fryermuth higher than 11 on my board because he really did look like he was going to become almost similar to what I was talking about with Zach Ertz. He was never going to be a big play guy, but the dude could just eat targets. And it is a slightly less crowded wide receiver room, but I think the downgrade in quarterback makes me think, oh, there's definitely not going to be an upgrade in targets out of someone like a Pat Fryermuth. I don't like him as much because of the situation around him, but I still think he's going to be productive, and there's a chance that he could be a late round flyer that turns into a decent starter most weeks for you. It's just not going to be the blow it away league winning tight end.
No, that's a great point. I think I'm with you too. The quarterback controversy, I think I'm going to word it a little bit differently than you did about Fryermuth. It's not that I don't think Trubisky or Kenny Pickett isn't as, you know, talented as last season Ben Roethlisberger, but I think they have the ability to get to the outside more and get the wide receivers more involved, get Chase Claypool down the field a little bit more involved. He might not be that safety blanket, which he seemed to be. I think he still will play a part in the red zone, and he'll have his weeks as, you know, getting two touchdowns and being tight end one. He's a guy you might look for in as a cheaper option in daily fantasy when it's time to start playing that again. I do like Pat Fryermuth. I will talk about number 13, Irv Smith Jr. a little bit.
Actually, before you jump off of Fryermuth, I think Tyler is actually saying that he's going to be more of a safety blanket for the rookie quarterback or whoever it is, because it's worth noting he has him higher than Dawson Knox and Zach Ertz at number 9.
That is a great point. Thanks for pointing that one out. I'm going to skip over Hunter Henry. We have him at 12. George has him at 14. And I think that's mainly just touchdown regression. Jonnu Smith, you know, Mac Jones being a little bit, you know, into the offense, more new offensive coordinator, maybe spreading the ball around a little bit more. And he was just so touchdown dependent last year, some regression. But Irv Smith Jr. is a guy we currently have 13. That's where I have him ranked, that I'm definitely intrigued in. Tyler Conklin is no longer in Minnesota, who was a guy that became a reliable tight end, similar to a Dawson Knox last year. He's super athletic. He's coming off of a year of injury. So that's a question mark. He's kind of like the forgotten man that was drafted that same year of TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant, like when we had these two exceptional tight ends. Like Irv Smith Jr. was really good. I think this could be his year to be a breakout candidate, similar to what we saw out of Dallas Goedert last year, similar to what we saw out of Dawson Knox last year. Just a guy on a team that can break out. Now, he is a little bit lower because I still think he'll be option number 3 for behind Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. But we did see, like I mentioned, Tyler Conklin became, you know, a borderline startable tight end each week, and that was playing for a defensive-minded head coach that now has with Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins now has an offensive minded head coach, could untap Irv Smith Jr.'s potential.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that Irv Smith could be a guy to break out. And another guy who I want to talk about really quick that I think has a chance to break out, but not as good of a chance as Irv Smith, is Noah Fant. And this is going to come back to Seattle's quarterback situation for me, which in this one in the case, I think that not having a solid quarterback might work in Fant's favor. I think he could be the safety blanket, and there's a chance that he becomes the number 2 target more than Tyler Lockett, because Tyler Lockett's the downfield guy that I think is going to hurt the most from this quarterback swap. Their number 1's DK Metcalf. I don't think there's much denying that. But there's a chance that Noah Fant becomes the number 2 on that team and outplays this number 15 in tight ends that I have him at number 14 as a consensus, and not become a league winner, but become someone solid that we can play in good matchups at least.
For sure. And don't forget, Noah Fant does have the connection with Drew Lock if Drew Lock is to win the job. Like, they play together in Denver. They have a connection. That's a guy he can look for as he's starting to grasp the playbook because he's worked with him in the past. So Noah
He
Fant
was
is
tight end
definitely
12 in points last year playing with Drew Lock. Well, and
so
Teddy Bridgewater, but a little bit of both. Yeah.
so definitely interesting, a name to watch. And the other name that I really love that he fell to 15, because he's a guy that definitely intrigues me because of the offense he's going to be on. The Chargers, and that's Gerald Everett. He is a tight end. He'll be at least the third option behind uh, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. You could argue the fourth option behind Austin Eckler because how much he's involved with the passing game. But Jared Cook had his up and down games. If they can get that tight end position figured out and get him usage, like Gerald Everett is a talented, athletic guy. He seems to always be splitting roles with a tight end, whether that was in uh, Los Angeles with the Rams when he was splitting with Tyler Higbee, and then he was in Seattle last year where we thought he might be the guy, but he was still splitting time with like the Will Disleys and stuff like that. So Gerald Everett is really the only tight end of interest on the Chargers this year. So I'm definitely intrigued to see how that one pans out.
Yeah, and it's a high-powered offense. I think it's just I'm worried that either they're not an offense that's conducive to a good tight end, or an offense that is, just doesn't have enough targets to go around with all the talent around him. So that's why I have him this low. But yeah, not a bad, late round flyer kind of guy if he's the one you like that's left on the board near the end of the draft. But we're not going to go through our rest of our tight ends here, 16 through 33. You can check them out on the couchgms.com. Is there anybody else, though, Cody, you want to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, there's one name I do want to mention, and we currently have him at number 17. And I think that is
Homer.
because of his potential to be on PUP. And that's Robert Tonyan, if you heard George whisper Homer. But if Robert Tonyan is cleared for playing and he looks like he's going to be in week 1, he would probably jump all the way up to like tight end 10 for me, tight end 11, right around that Zach Ertz area for me as potential number 1 option for Aaron Rodgers. Like, the coaches have said they really missed him last year when he went down with his injury. Like, it took away a part of their offense. Like, he unlocks a lot for that team as like a middle of the field stretcher from the tight end position on bootlegs, rollouts. So a guy, I'm just not sure if he's gonna miss 6 weeks. Like, he's not worth drafting at that point, unless you can like stash him on your IR and not take a kicker, and then put him on your IR and take a kicker. But Robert Tonyan is a guy that has high upside potential. And 2 years ago, he had double-digit touchdowns. So it's not like he's a young guy coming in that doesn't know the offense or hasn't done it before, like an Irv Smith who we have at 13. He's a guy that has been a top tight end in the past, coming off of an injury, a significant one. But if he's back for week 1, Robert Tonyan is probably going to shoot up draft boards and my rankings at least.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody who could play a different style of game than he has in the past, because he was always a touchdown dependent kind of guy with so many targets left open now in that offense. You never know what could happen if he's somebody that has a rapport with Aaron Rodgers. The one guy that I expected you to talk about, though, that you didn't, is our number 20, Logan Thomas, because small sample size me all you want. He played 5 games last year. He was the 10th tight end in average points per game. He's done it a little bit before. If he can be healthy and stay on the field, there's a great chance that he goes from undrafted tight end to somebody who's worth spot starting or maybe even starting most weeks. So someone to keep an eye on that I probably wouldn't draft, but week 1, week 2 waiver wire could be a rush.
Definitely, George. And then there's one other name I do want to just give a quick shout out to. And no, it's not Rob Gronkowski because I don't believe he's not going to retire, but it is who will be replacing him, and that would be Cameron Brate. Now, I don't think he, at this point in his career, he's anywhere near the athlete that Rob Gronkowski was, even at his late stages. But Tom Brady likes the tight end, and Rob Gronkowski did finish as tight end 3 last year. So it's a position that he likes to go to. So he's a name, like, if you don't take a tight end at all, and in your last round, you need a tight end, and he's a guy that I would grab. You know, he might be a little bit lower, but he's on a high-powered offense who will probably be missing Chris Godwin to start the season. That, you know, they're talking up Russell Gage right now, but, you know, Cameron Brate has been there every year with Tom Brady. Even though Rob Gronkowski, he was there before, he was startable before. You know, he was a guy that beat out O.J. Howard when we thought O.J. Howard was going to be the guy. So he seems like old reliable, but he might just be what you need for your fantasy football team.
I'm going to throw out one more high variance guy for Tyler before we wrap it up, and that's Evan Ingram, who is now on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Tyler is way off from us on his rankings of Evan Ingram. He has him all the way up at 19. So obviously at 19, you're saying, yeah, it's not super high, but definitely a chance. If he turns into early career Evan Ingram and we see a step from Trevor Lawrence and that Jacksonville offense, he might be somebody worth looking at on the dartboard. So I had to mention it because I saw Tyler had him way higher than the two of us do, but just a name to keep in your back of your head.
For sure. Just too many options for me and so many unknowns in Jacksonville. It's very hard to get a grasp on who to own. Do you own Christian Kirk after how much money they give him? Is Travis Etienne playing in the passing game? A lot of question marks around them. That's why he's a little bit lower on my list. But that'll wrap up our tight end rankings. We have kickers and defenses next. I think it should just be defenses, but the boys are making us do kickers and defenses. So that'll be coming up. But as always, thanks for listening to the Couch GMs podcast. Tyler should be back next week. But since he's not here, he wanted me to remind you that this podcast is more fun for us and more fun for you when you get involved.
Yes, it is Cody and Tyler in our spirit. Thank you all for one more time for listening into the Couch GMs podcast. For the glasses wearing Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you all next week.
Boom.